Title, locked in an old steamer trunk by my parents to keep me quiet during movie night. I've always had a strange relationship with my parents, but nothing compares to what they did to me during my childhood. It's something I've never fully shared with anyone. But now, with the benefit of years and hindsight, I feel like I need to get this off my chest. So here goes. When I was about 7 or 8, my parents went through this phase of movie night, which, looking back, wasn't really about family bonding. No, for them, it was an escape. They'd light candles, make some popcorn, and settle into their couch for hours while they watched movies. And by watched movies, I mean they didn't want to be disturbed. At all. I was the kind of kid who was naturally curious, constantly buzzing around, and always asking questions. If I wasn't doing that, I was making noise just to entertain myself. I can't really blame them for wanting some peace, but the way they went about it, that's a whole other level of messed up. You see, instead of just telling me to go to my room or giving me some toys to occupy myself, they had a very specific solution to the problem of my incessant energy. One evening, after they'd endured my usual distractions, climbing on the couch, asking about every scene, getting up to make noise, they decided it was time to take action. And so they locked me in a steamer trunk. Yes, a large, old, wooden steamer trunk. The kind you imagine people using on old-timey ocean liners or during the Great Depression. It wasn't just any trunk either. It was heavy and suffocating, dark inside with barely any ventilation. But to my parents, it was the perfect solution. Just for a little while, they said. Just until the movie's over. You'll be fine. At first, I thought they were kidding. They had to be. But no, they weren't. They shoved me inside the trunk, told me to stay still, and then locked it. I remember the sound of the key turning in the lock, the cold metallic click that echoed in the hollow space of the trunk. The darkness wrapped around me like a suffocating blanket, and I was left alone, powerless to do anything but fidget in the small space. There was no room to move, no room to breathe freely. The air inside the trunk grew thick, and my tiny body started to feel claustrophobic. But my parents? They were blissfully unaware of my distress. They were watching their movie, completely focused on whatever scene was playing. I don't think I understood how disturbing it was at the time, but I felt abandoned. Not in a normal, I'm a little sad way. No, this was deep, gut-wrenching abandonment, where the world outside the trunk felt like it was happening without me. I could hear their muffled voices through the thick wood, their laughter, the sounds of the movie, while I was left in the dark, confined and ignored. Time didn't make it easier. The hours would drag on, every minute stretching longer and longer. I remember banging on the sides of the trunk, pleading with them to let me out, but they never heard me. Or maybe they didn't want to hear me. I don't know. All I could do was lay there, trying to make myself as small as possible while my legs grew numb and my head ached from the stale air. The scent of old leather and wood mixed with the faint smell of popcorn drifting through the air, but couldn't touch it. I couldn't reach it. When the movie ended, they would let me out, always so casually, as if it had been nothing, as if they hadn't just locked their child away in an uncomfortable dark prison for the sake of a few hours of uninterrupted entertainment. I'd emerge from the trunk disoriented and shaken, but I knew better than to speak up. After all, it was just a trunk, right? It wasn't like it was dangerous, was it? They would brush it off, and I would have to pretend it was normal, pretend like it didn't bother me. I didn't have the words to articulate how wrong it felt, how lonely it was in there. Looking back now, I'm horrified by what they did. I get that they probably thought I was too young to understand or to fight back, but it wasn't a temporary punishment or even a timeout. It was a method of silencing me, a way for them to escape me for a few hours without any care for how it might affect me. I never once felt safe during those moments. I only felt like a nuisance they couldn't escape unless I was locked away. It's taken years of therapy and reflection for me to process this. I've never told anyone, never shared it with a friend or family member. But now, finally, it feels like it's time. They're still my parents, and I still see them occasionally, but it's hard to forget how they made me feel so insignificant, so expendable. That old steamer trunk still haunts me, a symbol of everything I wasn't allowed to be. a child with a voice, with a presence, with needs that mattered. Update, the aftermath, a bit more clarity, but still struggling. Hey everyone! First of all, thank you for the overwhelming support and the kind messages. Reading your replies has been both healing and eye-opening, and I'm grateful for everyone who reached out with empathy and shared their own stories. I didn't realise just how many people have been through things like this, but I also didn't expect the flood of memories that it would bring up. Some of your comments helped me process things I didn't even know I was still holding on to. Since posting the original story, I've spent a lot of time reflecting and talking things over with a therapist. It's honestly been a journey I didn't expect to take, but I think I'm starting to understand how deep this goes. I've realised that the trunk wasn't just a one-off incident, it was part of a larger pattern in my childhood. I'd call it emotional neglect, but that's a term I'm still trying to fully grasp. For most of my younger years, it felt like I was just there to be out of the way, to not disturb the quiet bubble my parents wanted to live in. And when I did try to interact or express myself, it was usually shut down. I've had a few sessions where we've talked about how isolated I felt growing up, not just because of the trunk, but because I was often ignored in other ways too. For example, if I had a school project or was excited about something, my parents would brush it off or be too busy to listen. Even now, as an adult, I find myself feeling this intense need for validation, and sometimes, even when I get it, it doesn't feel real, like I'm still that kid who's being ignored or shut out. I've caught myself telling stories or sharing something important, only to notice that the person I'm talking to isn't fully engaged or their mind is clearly elsewhere. It's like I expect them to lock me in a trunk without them even realising it. I also wanted to share a bit about the aftermath with my parents. After I posted the original story, I felt like I was going to have to confront them about what happened, but that never really happened. Instead, I ended up having an almost awkward conversation with my mom. It wasn't about the trunk directly, but more about my feelings of neglect growing up. I mentioned how I often felt dismissed or like my emotions weren't considered. She got defensive, saying something along the lines of, "We were doing the best we could, and you were just a handful back then." I didn't push her on the trunk, though. I just couldn't. The idea of confronting them about something so deeply traumatic felt like a battle I wasn't ready to fight. I just let it slide, but inside, I was left feeling frustrated and still unheard. There was a small part of me that hoped maybe my parents would apologise or at least acknowledge that what they did was wrong. But deep down, I know that's probably not going to happen. They are who they are. I guess it's the reason I've kept so much of this inside for so long. I didn't expect them to understand. I'm still figuring out how to deal with this. It's hard, especially when I look back at the memories and try to make sense of how much that trunk and other moments shaped my view of myself. I've realised that I struggle with boundaries, with asking for help, and with voicing my needs in relationships. My instinct is to keep quiet, to avoid being too much or too demanding, just like I learned to do as a kid, to avoid being locked away. Thank you again to everyone who's shared their thoughts and experiences. It's been comforting to know I'm not alone in this. For anyone else who's been through something similar, whether it was something physical like the trunk or emotional neglect in other forms, I see you. I hear you. We deserve to be heard. I'm still in the process of working through this, but I'll update again if I feel like there's more to share. I'll keep pushing for healing, even if it's slow. It's a work in progress. Thanks again, everyone. Final update, the journey of healing and letting go. I wanted to post one last update and thank everyone for the support, kind words, and shared experiences. Writing about what happened to me in the past and reading all your responses has been a deeply emotional process, but it's also been liberating in ways I didn't expect. I never imagined I'd open up about something so painful, but now I feel like I'm at a place where I can finally start to let go of some of the weight I've been carrying. A lot has happened since my last update. After posting the original story, I started getting more serious about my therapy sessions. I'm not going to lie, it's been tough. There have been times when I felt like I was digging into a wound that just wouldn't heal. It's hard to reconcile the idea of being locked away in a trunk as a child with the fact that I'm now an adult trying to build a life that isn't shaped by that trauma. But through therapy, I've started to see things more clearly. The biggest revelation I've had is that it wasn't just the trunk itself that damaged me. It was the larger pattern of neglect and emotional distance that I was subjected to. Growing up, I was always told to be quiet, to stay out of the way, to not be a problem. And as a result, I spent much of my adult life feeling like I wasn't allowed to express my feelings or assert myself. I didn't realize how much of that mindset was rooted in my childhood until I started unpacking these things with my therapist. But here's the thing. I've learned to forgive myself. I've come to terms with the fact that I wasn't the problem. It wasn't my fault that I was loud or curious or just needed attention. I was a child. I needed love, validation, and connection. And I wasn't getting that. The guilt I carried around for so long for thinking I was the reason my parents treated me that way has started to fade. As for my parents, well, nothing has really changed. I haven't directly confronted them about the trunk or the way they treated me, mainly because I've realized that I don't need their acknowledgement to heal. I've spent so much of my life waiting for them to apologize or for them to validate my pain, but I've learned that's not something I can rely on anymore. What I needed all along was to validate myself and to accept that their actions were a reflection of their own limitations, not mine. I've also come to understand that my relationship with them, as it stands now, is complicated. We talk, we share meals, but I no longer expect them to be the parents I once wished for. They can't give me what they didn't have the ability to give. And I'm okay with that. I've made peace with the fact that I might never get that heartfelt apology or understanding from them, but I don't need it to move forward. I've also started to build new, healthier relationships. I've become better at setting boundaries and expressing my needs, even when it feels uncomfortable. I'm learning to be kind to myself, to stop punishing myself for the ways I've been shaped by my childhood. It's been a slow process, but it's been incredibly freeing. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm finally starting to live for me, not for anyone else's approval or to stay out of the way. To anyone out there who's gone through something similar, I just want to say that you are not alone. You are not too much. You are not too loud, too demanding, or too sensitive. Your feelings matter, and you deserve to have them heard and respected. I know it can be hard to heal from deep-rooted wounds, especially when the people who should have been there for you weren't able to provide the love and care you needed. But trust me when I say that you have the power to heal yourself. It takes time, it takes patience, but it's possible. I don't think I'll ever fully forget about the trunk or the way my parents treated me, but I'm not letting it control my life anymore. I'm learning to live without carrying that heavy past on my shoulders. So thank you again to everyone who has supported me on this journey. I'm moving forward and it feels good. This will be my final update. I've said what I needed to say and I'm ready to keep moving forward. Wishing everyone peace, healing and strength.